What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York again, calling from the quarantine zone, and this time we got Paul from Black Orchid Empire. Thank you so much for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Yeah, it's so great to have you here. The newest album is Semaphore, which is scheduled to come out this Friday. Do you just want to talk about like how the making of this record was in terms of the recording and songwriting and mixing and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, it was fun stuff. it can be a challenging thing. So we run a recording studio in London, and we would just get together after our sort of daytime sessions and write. It was the first time with the record that myself, Dave, and Billy were just all in the control room together. And maybe I had like a guitar riff, or there was a bass part, or a vocalizer, or something, or some drum kind of patterns, and we would just pool our ideas and thrash it out. And have a couple of drinks and see what happened. And it was a super chill writing process for this. And then when it came to the recording, it's a weird thing when you have a band with 3 producers in it. But basically, that's what we are, and we all push each other and ourselves to be at the edge of what we can achieve all the time. So we're basically constantly pushing ourselves, and we would basically take it in turns to produce each other's parts when we recorded. So, you know, me and Dave would produce Billy's drums, and me and Billy would produce Dave when he was playing his bass, and we did it that way, which is kind of balanced because we're a 3-piece, so it all works like that. It's usually the 2 versus 1, or I guess we all agree, so that's fine.
Yeah.
If it was all 3 of us having different opinions, I guess that would be tricky, but that hasn't really come up. And then I mixed the record, and then it was sent over to my buddy in Australia, who mastered all the Periphery records and Architects, and he's an amazing mastering engineer. So that was kind of the finishing touches that way. But it was just a super chill process musically, and also in terms of lyrics and the ideas and the themes, because everybody was pitched in on those as well, and we would do it usually very quickly all together. So it was pretty cool.
That's interesting. I mean, 3 producers in the same band. That sounds like it could get pretty violent sometimes. But
essentially, but it never does. We have the right amount of overlap and the right amount of shared taste, and it works really well. And so like we would always know instinctively what page the other 2 guys were on, I think. And basically, it's the job of whoever's performing their parts just to be the artist. And it's the other 2 guys who are really co-producing their performance. So it's not as complicated as you might think it is. I'm sure it wouldn't work for some people, but we've worked together for so long on different projects. I mean, I've literally been working with Billy since like 2003. And I met him when he was producing a band I was in. So we've always had that relationship, so it works in that way quite easily.
Yeah. For people who may have not heard the album yet, do you feel like that some of these singles that you release, like Evergreen or Natural Selection, and the other ones can almost like serve as like a clear representation of what the whole album is going to sound like, or do you think that it's way more experimental and even way more diverse?
I think the latter. I think the singles are there because they're all good introductions to something that we do, and there are definitely shared qualities between the songs. I think they're all melodic, and they're all super textured, and there's a lot of complexity and technical stuff going on pretty much on every song. But at the same time, some of them are way more heavy riffs, and some of them are a little bit kind of more. They're not really light, because I think it all has a darkness to it and a heaviness to it. But there's a lot of dynamics, and there's a lot of kind of different textures at play. We definitely didn't want to we wanted to make sure we just didn't write the same song 10 times, you know what I mean? Each one is a completely self-contained thing, and they all have similar qualities, but they're all quite different songs. I don't know if that's your experience of listening to the record as well.
Well, I mean, some artists, what I've learned, don't really like this label, but from what I got out of it, I felt like this record was fairly experimental. Like, I got many different vibes from it, heard many different sounds. Like, was that maybe like a preconceived idea? Like, is there a lot of improvising in the songwriting, or do you kind of go into the studio or in songwriting mode with like an idea of being like, this is what we have to do?
Well, what was cool is that the 2 things happened at the same time. So we would literally come up with an idea and then record it, and just put it down there and then tweak it on the fly, and that kind of became the demo that then just got re-recorded as the master. So there wasn't like a separate writing process. I mean, there was a tracking process, but for example, I think I only re-recorded maybe 3 songs of vocals. The rest are all the demo vocals.
Oh, wow.
and so I was just drunk on a Thursday night. we were just making some crazy thing work, and then we came back later, and it was Billy when I started, because I just assumed I was going to re-record everything. I did a couple of tracks, and then Billy was like, dude, why are you re-recording these? These sound great. They sound like you really meant it and you were just in the moment and you were having fun. And I was like, I hadn't really thought about it, but I haven't been able to do better. You're right. So some of them are re-recorded, but a lot of them aren't. And some of the songs like came together super fast. Like, so I think Winter Keeps Us Warm, which is, I guess it's a slightly simpler song than some. One of the more mellow, more kind of, I don't really love the term ballad, but it fits in that genre maybe. But I came up with the original kind of riff for that, and then we sat down, and it was like 6 p.m. or something, and by midnight we had the whole thing, including all the melodies and all the vocals, completely recorded as a demo, and nothing changed when we tracked it, really. A couple of small things changed. Mm-hmm. So it's a weird one, because it isn't the traditional thing where you go into a rehearsal space or whatever, or you write songs over several years like we did with our first record, and then you record them all. It was all in the same space, and because we've been working together for so long, we were comfortable enough to do that, where we didn't have to worry about that process getting kind of corrupted or not being involved enough. We're pushing ourselves super hard all the time.
Yeah, and you mentioned like keeping the demo vocals going. I think a lot of people would appreciate that, because I think there's an honesty that's demonstrated in it, and almost kind of like a rawness to it as well, that I think a lot of people are, especially now, are really into.
Yeah, it's like, if it's not broken, why are you gonna replace it? But it was impossible for me to tell, because it's my it's my instrument other than guitar, and I'm just listening to the imperfections and stuff. But that's why it's really important to have a producer, is they're the people who have the objective perspective on what you're doing. And in my case, it was the other two guys going, you don't need to redo this. Like, it worked. And it worked because it was honest at the time. And I was saying this in a few different interviews, actually, is that authenticity is very obvious and inauthenticity is equally obvious. And people just get it. When it works and you meant what you said and you meant your performance, then people understand that straight away. It connects with them.
Yeah, of course. When it comes to like the lyricism, do you need to hear music before you come up with lyrics, or is there ever a time where maybe like lyrics or even a concept or a story could determine the outcome of the music itself?
I have a pretty standard way of doing it, where I will always write harmonic content and melody first, and then I'll come up with a lyric that fits that afterwards. I'm very, very rarely do it the other way around. I might have a little snippet of an idea. In this particular instance, all the songs have their own narratives, and they're all self-contained on this kind of sci-fi theme that we have going. So it was cool, because everybody could be like, well, let's make this one about robots, or let's make this one about something weird. And that meant that it was really freeing lyrically, because you could just write whatever. And of course it relates to me personally, it relates to the other guys personally, but it's through the lens of science fiction, instead of just being, I experienced this thing and I'm writing about it now. But yeah, lyrically speaking, I almost always do it that way around. So it's music first, then lyric.
Okay, fair enough. And like when it comes to like going back to like the experimental quality of your sound, like it's got to be kind of easier to try new things as well, right? With Black Orchid Empire, it's almost like it's not like you have a formula that you have to stick with, so to speak.
Yeah, I would be terrified of being in a band that had a sound it couldn't escape from. You know what I mean? I think it's, for me, what the music I always enjoy the most is bands that push themselves every time to do something interesting. So bands like Deftones or Carnival or Radiohead or Tool or any of those bands, I feel like you can say something one time, but the power of saying it a second time is always going to be less. So if you have the exact same idea and you do it for one album and then you do it on the next album, it's always going to be diluted, it's always going to be watered down. I really respect bands that push themselves to develop, but the important thing about that is you can't be doing that to search for what you're all about. You have to know what that is, but then experiment within that. And it really shows when you get bands like Queens of the Stone Age who know what they do, but within that they could do like almost different genres and it would still make sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember, like, it says on your page that you're a big fan of Deftones, which,
Yeah.
which is awesome because Chino's one of my favorite vocalists ever. But, like, I mean, like, being that you take multiple inspirations and stuff, like, it almost seems like experimentation is your sound in a way.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And also, we're just the kind of melting pot of all the different influences we have, whether that's, you know, Prince or Meshuggah, it's still going to come through. And like, it's been really important for me to really experiment with melodic ideas on this record, and really try to create melodies, because we're a fairly heavy band, but it's not, to some people it's not heavy because it doesn't have scream vocals. But I'm like, I don't do screaming, I can't do it, it's not my thing. What my thing is making melodies that will stick with you, and I feel like I've been trying to push that craft as far as it can go.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you're the type of band where to like the heavy metal crowd, you guys are like Cher, but like to the more radio friendly crowd, you guys are like Emperor. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
We can't fucking win either way. Basically, it's a tricky one. But on the other hand, that's the negative way of looking at it. But actually, the positive thing is that, to be honest, most people who love really heavy music, like, we love heavy music, like, we listen to crazy heavy stuff all the time, but normally that crowd, actually, if it's good, they'll get it. And that's why you can have bands like Dirty Loops playing like a prog rock festival, because they're like 80s funk pop, but they're so progressive that, and so like they shred so much that it can be appreciated by the kind of prog metal crowd. So it's always been more of a blessing than a curse, I think.
Yeah.
I do get that. It's funny because sometimes the exact same song, I'll get one guy saying, "What is this weak shit?" and then we'll have someone else being like, "This is a bit too heavy for me," It's so fun.
And it goes back to the songwriting too. Like, if you experiment too much, critics would be like, "Oh, the record's all over the place." If you are very consistent, they're going to say, "Oh, this record's very repetitive." So I feel like music in general is just always a catch-22 situation.
Well, yeah, and there's no such thing as something that's right for everybody. And if that was the case, it would be boring, because it would be like everyone likes vanilla. What's the point? The interesting thing for me is just engaging someone. It doesn't matter whether you engage them positively or negatively in some ways, as long as their interest is held. They might decide, you know what, I listened to that and it wasn't the kind of thing I like, and that's fine. But at least they listened to it. At least it wasn't like, I'm not even going to go near that because it looks like it would suck.
Fair enough.
It's so hard to get people's attention at the best of times. But listen, music is a thing that is super personal, super subjective, and one thing that somebody likes will be poisonous to someone else, and that's just the way it's always going to be.
Yeah, and I'll just say, too, just to, close this topic, the whole metal elitism thing I've always seen, or like people saying this isn't heavy, or that's all I just see on the internet. Every time I'm at a show, like, I've been to like death metal shows, and I would show somebody My Chemical Romance, and they'd be like, "Huh, this is pretty good." So like,
yeah, this is the thing. I mean, it's really easy to be elitist when you're not actually talking to that person in real life. Like, you're just sharing a fucking opinion. I don't know. I feel like the heavy music scene is guilty of elitism sometimes, but generally what happens is people are only saying that because they want other people to say, "Yeah, you're so right." And actually, if they don't get that feeling, they actually do kind of like it. Just because you like one crazy heavy band doesn't mean you can't like others. It's such a strange concept to me that you would, like, imagine if you only read the work of one author ever, and you would never read any other author because you're like, "That's my guy." Well, that's just strange to me. Why would you do that? Why would you restrict yourself like that?
Yeah. And if you're a musician, it really hurts you, because like there's been many times where I want to be like, "Oh, let me guess what your favorite band is." The band you sound exactly alike.
Yeah, right, exactly. And as a producer, it's very powerful to do the opposite of that and be fluent in lots of different genres. And if you're a mix engineer or a producer, the important thing is that you have a wide musical vocabulary, because you can draw from so many influences, and that's what makes things amazing. I'm convinced that you could get Quincy Jones to produce a metal record and it would be cool. It might be weird, but it would be cool. You know what I mean? It's just people who are really skillful at lots of different genres are always, for me, more interesting than someone who's like, "I'm super specialized and I just do this one thing," because it's like, how do you know what might be out there unless you allow yourself to take those influences in?
Of course. When it comes to working as a producer, is it like different? Like, is it like almost a different mind frame altogether working with other musicians as opposed to Black Orchid Empire? Or is there kind of like a usual method behind the madness that applies to everything?
Well, yeah, because your goal is always the same. So with Orchid, it's we're just trying to serve ourselves, right? So we're not ever really capable of being a true producer in that sense, because at the end of the day, it's our music. And even though that's kind of corrected by the fact there's three of us to some extent, but even given that, it's never going to be exactly the same as having an external presence. When I'm producing other people, or even just mixing other people's stuff, I'm always trying to hear it through the ears of a listener, not through the ears of a creator. And the amount of times that you get somebody... My classic thing is every band has too many intros, and they'll have like a cool riff that one guitarist wrote, but then the other guitarist wrote a cool riff too, so they're like, well, now we just have to have both of them before the song starts. And it's like, that isn't good for the song, it's just good for your own ego as a guitarist, right? So anyone outside the band is going to say, no, you're taking far too long to get into this song. But when you're in the band, you think, well, I have to please this guy and this guy. So it's really funny to put that hat on, and it's always so obvious.
Yeah.
When you're outside of it, what needs to happen. So, yeah, it is a different agenda. I like to think that I can draw. I'm always trying to remind myself to be objective when I'm mixing our records, for example.
Yeah.
I think as long as you can try and keep a handle on that, then you won't go too far wrong. I think the problem is when people lose objectivity and just go down a rabbit hole of their own sort of self-indulgence, and it really can feel like life and death. Like how long a middle eight is can feel like such a big deal. And the funny thing is that most people listening are only going to get that far if everything else that leads up to it is killer. Like, how many times have you put a song on and just dropped out within the first verse because you're like, nah, it's not for me. You know, it's we live in an age of a very short attention span, so getting that worried about like whether or not it's 32 bars or 16 in the middle of the song, it almost seems crazy.
Yeah, I've always said that like a producer or a mixer is basically the fifth Beatle, the sixth Beatle. If you're in Slipknot, the 11th Beatle. So
yeah, exactly. By that time, who knows? Who knows how many? I always want to know how like Slipknot got together and jammed in the early days, and like imagine booking the club shows where it's like a 100-cap venue and they're talking about having 9 guys on stage. I just love that.
Yeah, and that poor club owner who had to give everybody in that band drink tickets.
I'm not sure that ever happened.
Yeah, I have a couple more questions for you.
Okay.
You ready for the most difficult question of the whole interview?
Go for it.
You've been really good at answering these questions so far, so you might have a good answer for this. This could go for Black Orchid Empire or for producing. But you have a song like Natural Selection that's like 3.5 minutes. You have a song like Monolith that's just 3 minutes. You have a song like Evergreen that's 5 minutes. How do you know when a song is done?
Art is never completed, it's just abandoned.
Oh, I get that all the time. You could do better than that.
You know what I mean? That's the classic thing. No, the truth is that these songs were all put together in a way that made that like a really obvious thing. So you got to remember that we're in the context here of maybe working on 1,000 tracks in the last year or two. It's like we are not in a vacuum writing our own music, and most bands are writing their own songs, and that's all they ever write. But I might have written 5 pop songs the same week that I was writing one little riff for BOE. So it became so obvious to all of us, and that the real key thing is that the three of us could bounce off each other in that regard and be like, okay, we have the beginning of the song, we have all the way up to the end of chorus 2, what's going to happen now? And somebody like, okay, you drop down in dynamic, it's got to go small here because we want to have a big finish. All right, cool, let's do that. And then you just know when it's coming up to the end. It's a really hard thing to describe because to somebody that isn't involved in that process, it sounds like you're doing some weird magic, but really it's bonehead obvious most of the time. And it's only not obvious when you want to indulge your own ego for some reason that's not actually serving the song.
Fair enough. That was I'll give you a B+ on that answer.
Only because I led with the obvious one, right?
Yeah, that's like the default one. I actually keep a tally mark of the usual. It's either art is never finished, it's only abandoned, or whenever I get the final mix back.
Do you know what, though? That's like, at least I was aware that I was taking the piss.
Yeah. All right, fine. I'll give you an A minus then.
Thank you. There you go.
Yep. And finally, before we go, obviously, thanks to a certain virus that shall not be named, at least on my outlet. But I'd imagine that once all this is over, Black Orchid Empire will be probably taking the music out on the road. Can you ever bring this material to the States one day?
Dude, we just started working with TKO, who are a really good agent in the US, and we're very happy to be working with those guys, and we're going to be touring the hell out of the US next year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, man.
That's awesome. Well, we look forward to having you here.
That is the plan.
Yep, come to New York City. But Paul, thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Paul of Black Orchid Empire, Semaphore. Be sure to pick that up this Friday. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.